Good evening. Welcome to the Community Library. My name is Jenny Emery Davidson. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Library. Congratulations on getting here this evening. Or if you are joining from far via live stream, we're so glad that you have that option. Welcome everyone to the John A. and Carol O. Moran Lecture Hall. This is a poem by Mark Van Doren called Spring Thunder. I almost can't read it with a straight face. Listen, the wind is still, and far away in the night, see the uplands fill with a running light. Open the doors, it is warm. And where the sky was clear, look, the head of a storm that marches here. Come under the trembling hedge, fast although you fumble. There, did you hear the edge of winter crumble? That whole poem is to get to that last line tonight. I mean, I embraced winter, but I think tonight we're bringing out the brass. We're thinking about the summer symphony. Let's hear the edge of winter crumble. And then you could imagine it, yes. This week, the Music Festival presents its winter season concerts at the Argyris on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday evenings. The program features works for percussion and especially brass. So tonight, we are delighted that the festival's music director, Alasdair Neale, has brought along with him the 4 principals of the orchestra's brass sections to talk about their instruments and the music that you'll hear this week. Please join me in welcoming Alasdair back to the Community Library.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. So happy to have you brave, hardy souls out on a rather less than stellar night. But thank you for coming, and thank you for all of those listening online at home. Just delighted to have my dear friends, the 4 brass principals of the Sun Valley Music Festival, with me tonight to talk. Let me introduce you to them, although many of them I'm sure are familiar faces to you. From this side on, Bill Vermeulen, Principal Horn of the Houston Symphony. Peter Warhaftig, Principal Tuba of the San Francisco Ballet Orchestra. Andrew McCandless, Principal Trumpet of the Toronto Symphony. And Gordon Wolfe, Principal Trombone of the Toronto Symphony. So these guys are sharing a mic, and I get one of my own in the middle just to, typical, isn't it?
Typical of a conductor.
I didn't even ask for it, they gave it to me. So we thought we would talk a little bit about, so you can get to know the 4 principals a little bit better. We'll start off by what I call people's origin stories. How did you come to play your instrument? What were the circumstances? Bill, would you like to start the proceedings off?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I started actually not on horn, but when I was 5, I started on piano, and I was pretty serious about playing piano. And at 7, I started singing. So really my earliest musical schooling was on voice and on piano. And my mom was a semi-professional cellist. She played in a community orchestra, and she would take me along to her community orchestra rehearsals rather than pay for a babysitter. And so every week she would say, "Now, Billy, you just sit and shut up and watch." And so since I could read music from age 5, it was very interesting for me. I started with one of her best friends in the violin section and then moved to the violas and worked my way back through every section, finally winding up in the horn section and realizing that, gosh, these guys get to have so much fun. They can say things and joke around, and the conductor can't hear. And the horn always had the love theme, or it always had the heroes theme, and it just seemed like a lot of fun. I used to call it the spaghetti horn back then because it looked like a big bunch of spaghetti balled up in tubing, and that was my favorite dish when I was about 10. So in 5th grade, I started the horn, and it came along pretty easily, and I realized at one point if I wanted to be a world-class concert pianist, I'd have to practice 8 or 10 hours a day. And if I wanted to do the same on the horn, I could do 3 to 5 hours a day. You do the math, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, that was my origin story. I think we'll leave it over to Peter now.
Thanks, Bill. Similar to Bill, I started piano at age 5 as my first instrument, and I'm sure I wasn't nearly as good as you, Bill. um, but I was really interested after a while in playing an instrument where you actually played with other people. And 7th grade rolled around, and at the school they were offering instruments to people, and I was trying to decide which instrument to play. And I was out in a field, and I saw some sheep, and one went ba, another went ba, and I said tuba. And so,
Ow.
so
Yeah, come on. You can move closer.
yeah. So anyway, it's been a fun journey. It's a fun instrument because it can tell all kinds of different stories. You know, you have the oompa aspect of it. It can be surprisingly agile at times in other people's hands, uh, and it's great to play with the brass section and feel like I'm the bottom voice and kind of supporting in a supporting role. I really enjoy that.
Did you start on trumpet, Andrew?
I did start on trumpet.
Uh-huh.
I did, but I don't have like any great cool story about it. I didn't really want to play the trumpet, to be honest. But in 4th grade, I had one of the like best sales pitches I've ever heard in my life. The band teacher came to our class and he said, "Who would like to get out of class 2 hours a week?" And he didn't say what it was for. His name was Mr. McDowell. I didn't know who he was. I'd never seen him before. He didn't bring an instrument. He just said 2 hours a week. Me, perhaps not the model student. It's like, great. So the next week they bring us to this room, and in the room there's a table with all these instruments on it. And the trumpet was literally the first instrument I saw. And so I picked it up and went and thought, well, this is great. 2 hours a week. This is awesome. I don't know what this is or what I'm doing, but I have 2 hours a week off from school. I should say, though, that was very, I mean, clearly fortuitous for me, because as I went on and played more and more, and I went to a middle school where I had a band teacher who completely changed my life. Completely changed my life. And I think, without making too much of a stretch, I think probably music has changed all of our lives, and almost always for the better. So I always tell that story because it's true. It's what really happened. But what a good break for me. I feel very lucky to have gotten out of class 2 hours a week and happened to pick up a trumpet, because it worked out pretty good.
Gord.
So my story is a bit weird for a professional musician. I grew up in a very small town, smaller than this by a large mile, just over the Canadian border. I'm Canadian. Can you tell? Sorry.
I was just going to say, would you say you're sorry?
Just north of Spokane, actually. So really directly north, kind of maybe a little northwest of here now, in the mountains, in the snow. I grew up with this. It's still quite jarring for me because I haven't been in a while. But I grew up on a farm, and I really had no musical. The family wasn't musical. I grew up in a very religious family that didn't really listen to music outside of the church. And so, like Peter, I just started in band. In the 8th grade, I picked baritone for no reason whatsoever. And like Andrew, I had a junior high school band teacher who just kind of changed the way I looked at things. I thought that he was just an amazing person. He influenced me in such positive ways. I decided in the 9th grade I was going to teach band. So I did everything I could, geared myself towards doing music education, and in fact did the entire degree. I substitute taught one day, and this is true, and I'm sad to say I had a kid up against the wall. And I thought to myself, maybe this isn't for me. So that was it. I went back and got a master's degree, took another shot at becoming a musician. Luckily, it worked out. I would say the strangest thing probably on my end is that I didn't have the family support. I didn't have the music surrounding me. To this day, my parents have never heard me play professionally. And so there are pros and cons to that, obviously. The pros, believe it or not, are that from an early age, I had to find the desire for myself. I didn't have parents saying, go practice. I didn't have them listening to recitals and telling me what was great or what wasn't great. From the very beginning, I felt like it was on me. if I wanted to do this, that I had to find my own inner drive. So I in some ways, I'm thankful for it, and that might be weird, but I am. Luckily for me, I got a job before I finished school. We were talking about that earlier today, and here we are, many years later.
I find this so fascinating about how just for various reasons we can end up in what defines our lives by either a process of elimination on Bill's and complete ridiculous, just dumb fate and chance on Andrew's. Dumb is the operative word. And sometimes it's what you want, sometimes it's not what you want. I should have been a violinist. And the reason I'm not a violinist is that we had in my little school growing up in suburbs of London, one day, I think I would have been about 8, there was a peripatetic music teacher, violinist, that came to give, this was just a regular grade school, public school, normal school in England. And this teacher came to give some musical aptitude tests because they wanted to select 4 violin students or something like that. And I wasn't one of the ones selected. And the reason for that is that I had this, as a very small kid, I had this habit of sort of gnawing slightly on my left index finger, which as a result was ever so slightly distended. It looks pretty normal now, I think. But at the time, and the violin teacher said, well, his left hand, his finger's too big for playing the violin, which when you think about it is stupid beyond belief, because a number of violinists have fairly big sausage-like fingers. And my parents thought, well, that's stupid, because they already knew I had perfect pitch, I was singing in tune, I had a really good ear. They said, well, if you can't play violin, what would you like to play? And I said, I don't know, flute. And that's how but I should have been a violinist first. And so, it's one of these, again, for whatever reasons, we all end up where we are. But we're here really to talk about brass. And let's talk about, we could go back a long way in history, because the instruments that you see before you are a result of quite a bit of technological advances. But all of these instruments have much older roots. But they also have a common way of creating sound. Bill, do you want to just talk for a few minutes about that, and we can all pitch in and play it a little bit?
So firstly, the brass instrument is really nothing more than an amplifier. And if you look at the history of how this all came about, you have to go to prehistoric times. Literally, the instruments you see were signaling instruments before they ever became what you see in front of you. And this was done somewhat by dumb chance. Since caveman times, people have been banging on rocks or banging on logs trying to make noise and send signals. And so that's how drums came to be, and it's in fact how brass instruments came to be. They may have taken a kudu horn and noticed that the end was broken off, and so they blew on it. And interestingly enough, the lips started to vibrate, and they realized it had a big sound come out of it, and that sound was louder than the human voice. So it was a means of communicating at greater distances. And so literally it was used by warring tribes. They would say the signal was, hey, we're going to come over and kill you. But it might have been, hey, we're having a party. Come and join us at our tribe. So this is how these instruments came to be. It could have been a seashell. If you go into the Polynesian culture, they would blow on a conch shell, and it was really loud, and they could signal to the other catamarans whether they needed to come together or whether the seas were safe. Every call had a different meaning. And so the original brass instruments were nothing more than a coil. And the way they got sound out of it is, interestingly enough, if you put your lips together and just simply go, that is a buzz. And you don't have to work to do that. That happens naturally. And it happens based on a physics principle called the Bernoulli principle. The Bernoulli principle, and this is something that fascinated me, is that if you have, say, 2 Coke cans next to one another and you put a straw between them, you would think that's going to blow those cans apart. But in fact, a low air pressure system is created and it brings them together. So for us, on our brass instruments, we have a thing here called a mouthpiece. And what we want to do is take this wide buzz and centralize it. And this rim of the mouthpiece isolates the flesh. And it's funny because it's almost like a miracle. When I started the horn, the band director said, hey, if you want to play the horn, you have to have a really good ear. So he said, think this note. And he said, okay, I'm thinking that note. He goes, now, can you sing it? I went, "No, no." And he said, fine. Now, if you put your lips together and you blow and think the note really hard, that note will come out. So I went, and that sounded like a duck quacking to me. I thought, how can this be this instrument that is used in Star Wars, and Beethoven featured this, and Mozart wrote Concerti? And sure enough, he said, okay, now if you focus that buzz into the horn, because this tiny part of the mouthpiece focuses that buzz, and here's what happens. A miracle. It was like, how can I take this quacky little buzz and all of a sudden it becomes this gorgeous golden sound? And then what all of ours share in common is that we have basically it's a length of tubing that we then alter the length via our valves, or in Gordon's case, one valve and a slide. And I'll show you how that works. It's based on the overtone series. And the harmonic series that we use is a bunch of notes. In our case, we have about 16 notes that are all available just with your lips alone. So I'll show you the basic notes that we play. Now, if I can do all that with my lips, what do I need the valves for? Well, you might have noticed that some of the notes are missing. And they noticed this in Mozart's time. And with horn players, we figured out a way to get those missing notes. I'll show this to you as well. Put your hand, close off the bell, you get the missing notes. So I'm glad they invented bells.
Great.
And now, because they had only these certain notes available and some of them are missing, they realized that they could make that same length of tubing, but in different keys. They'd do it, and they'd make it a little longer. So in my case, and everybody's case here, we either add or subtract tubing. I'll show you how this works. No valves. If I add that much tubing, I get the same notes. Add that much tubing. So they're all, you add more, you get the same notes, but in a different key. And then you can mix and match them. If I put these two together, put these two together. In the end, when you have all these different valves available to you, you wind up catching all the notes, and then none of them are missing. And so that's when you put them all together, it actually sound pretty nice. So I'll play you a little tune to demonstrate the sound of the horn, and then we'll let Peter talk about the specifics of the tuba.
That was beautiful, Bill. So, is this on?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. The tuba looks a little different from the horn, but there are some similarities, believe it or not. The tuba and the horn are both conical instruments, as opposed to the trumpet and the trombone, which are cylindrical instruments. Conical means we start with a very small opening or slide or tube, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's what happens with the tuba too. The instruments over there are cylindrical, and there's a slight different characteristic of sound. The conical instruments, in general, are a little less direct sounding, a little more indirect, for want of a better word, rounder. Although the way these guys play, that's not the case. So the tuba, as you can see, is a very large instrument. This is a C tuba in the key of C, which means that the overtone series starts on C, overtone series where I don't press any vowels down. I'll play the lowest note in the overtone series, which is the low C just above the bottom of the piano. So that's the fundamental pitch of the horn. Some people confuse it for other things. That's part of the overtone series. It can play very low in an orchestra. Prokofiev, well-known composer, really likes low notes on the tuba. So while that's going on, there's a sword fight going on stage during Romeo and Juliet. So that's kind of fun. The tuba takes a lot of air, as you might imagine, and it's somewhat challenging at this elevation to get used to things. It probably takes 4 or 5 times as much air as a French horn, I would say. But, you learn how to breathe efficiently. One thing that I like to do on the tuba is just play music that's not expected for the tuba. Something called condensation that sometimes gathers in our instruments, so I'm going to discreetly.
It's not spit, right?
So it's kind of fun to steal other instruments' music because oftentimes the tuba is, as Tubby would say, has the task of playing something like this. Thank you. So I think I'm ready for Andrew to.
Yeah. Your turn, thank you.
So I think how we play brass instruments has been really well covered. So I won't spend too much time about that. I will tell you that one of the really fun things about the trumpet is the fact that there's so many different trumpets. I own about 13 trumpets, although I heard about a colleague who owns like over 90, which is a little bit frightening. That seems like a problem more than
A cry for help.
somebody with money, somebody who needs to talk to somebody. Anyway, but some would say we need all these trumpets to cover up for all of our deficiencies. Like, why couldn't we just do it on one trumpet? And this is largely true, but but still, it's a lot of fun, and we can make a lot of different colors with these instruments. So I have here today, I have a C trumpet, and this would be the same as piano pitch. And the trumpet that looks very similar to this is a B flat trumpet, which is a slightly longer here. The tuning slide is a little bit longer, and that's one pitch below concert pitch, right? So that's a C trumpet, and we play that most often in orchestras. And this is a flugelhorn, Chuck Mangione, yeah, right. So most often played in jazz, although we're playing flugelhorn in two pieces this week. And it's beautiful, much more mellow sound.
It's conical.
It's conical, yeah. Thank you, Bill. It's conical, so it's a much more beautiful, round sound. Checks in the mail, Bill. Of course, with conical, you always end up with more intonation problems, but... and then this is a piccolo trumpet, which is, as you can see, quite a bit smaller.
Is that basically an octave above?
Almost.
Almost.
This one's in A, that's in C. You can also do, if I pull this slide in, I can make it piccolo trumpet in B flat. So that brings the entire instrument up 1/2 step. And like Bill was describing in the length of the tubing, that's the same for the trumpets. The shorter the instrument, the higher it plays. So one other thing, like a small thing that maybe we haven't touched on as much is, yes, the lips have to vibrate. And Bill is 100% right that this is just an amplifier for our voice. I agree, absolutely. One thing we didn't talk about is how do you make the lips vibrate faster? So one sort of easy way to think about it is whistling. If you whistle, as the note goes higher, the air goes a little faster. The tongue comes up, you have less room in the mouth, the air is quicker. And that helps the lips to vibrate faster. So when I'm thinking as a trumpet player, I'm often playing quite high. That's something that I have to spend time being aware of because of my particular instrument. So I thought I'd just play a couple of things on each one of these instruments so you can hear what they sound like. And in particular, this trumpet and this flugelhorn, these are interesting because we're playing Mussorgsky's Pictures in Exhibition this week, which was originally by Mussorgsky.
Yeah, for piano.
Yeah, for piano, and then orchestrated by Ravel for the orchestra. And now this is orchestrated by Howarth.
Elgar Howarth, yeah.
Yes, for brass. Now, in the Ravel orchestration, the piece opens with trumpet, a trumpet solo on a cylindrical trumpet like this. It could be a C or a B flat trumpet. But in Howarth's version that we're playing this week, it opens on a flugelhorn. So I'll just play just a little bit of each opening so you can hear the difference in sound.
Okay.
After hearing that story about how you abused that child, I was very gentle with the child. Yeah. You know, he does not have kids, and this explains it. I've always wondered. So that's the trumpet, and a very bright, direct sound. And then on the flugelhorn, it's quite a bit different. In the Mussorgsky, these are the first notes that you'll hear, and they're on the flugelhorn. And interesting choice. I've actually always wondered why he did it that way. Do you know
Just
why?
bucking, I suppose bucking the trend, everybody would expect it to be on a brighter sound of a trumpet, and maybe he wanted it just, there are a lot, we'll talk about this a little later on, this specific arrangement of Pictures in Exhibition. There's an entire panoply of colors that are brought out from the brass section, and but that's one of them.
And then there's the piccolo trumpet, which sounds much different and quite a bit higher. I mean, it should sound higher. We'll see.
Yes.
Also, trumpet players' faces often go more red than others. Anyway, that's a little brief tour of the trumpet. So, trombone.
Thank you.
I like it when the valve instruments go first because then I can talk about all the ways the trombone is better. In all seriousness, obviously the biggest difference between the trombone and the other instruments is, as Bill mentioned, I have a slide, and I like to think of it as just different technology. Okay, so whereas they would push down the valve to show us the tubing on that second valve again. So Bill push downs a valve, and that much tubing is added, and I simply add the tubing. You tell me which is more efficient. Right? So with each subsequent valve that's pushed down, I add a position. So there are actually 7 positions on the trombone for most of us. Some of us add some. You shouldn't. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Generally speaking, that's where the positions go. Now, if I just put my arm there, everything would be very out of tune. So each note has its own little magic spot that we have to worry about and make sure it's in the right place. Very quickly, just to talk about the history of this instrument and how it's different from the others. If you go back to the 15th, 16th, 17th century, the other brass instruments couldn't play all of the notes. So they couldn't play the chromatic scale. But because the trombone, which was really mostly in its current condition, looked exactly the same except without the extra little valve here, it could play all of the chromatic notes of the scale. So even though nowadays you see it as a as jazz instrument, we're often the clown. We've got the glissandos, which I'll show you in a second, and we're always kind of the funny sounds. Back in the early days, we were actually the sacred instrument. We were often paired with violins and harpsichords, and we would play very vocal music. We would, for Mozart and Schubert, we would double the choir for support. And very quickly, I'm going to show you what the first trombone would look like.
Ooh.
It's a magic trick. So this is a strange trombone that helps us travel. And also, I like the sound of it better. But this is kind of what the early trombone would have looked like. And it was called a sackbut. And somebody had a really good sense of humor. I believe it's actually French for push and pull. So that's where the slide comes in. So just very quickly, I'll show you what that sounded like and why this instrument was paired with recorders and harpsichords and quiet instruments. Nowadays, you couldn't get away with that because the trombone's quite loud. So it has a very, very soft quality to it, and would have been paired often with cornettes, which were kind of a cross between a recorder and a trumpet. So you would take a piece of wood, you hollow it out, you put holes in it, and then you buzz it like a trumpet, and they would be paired together to be able to play kind of more chromatic notes and passages. I'm just trying to think quickly here. So once the trombone was created, after the sackbut, we got into playing louder music. I'm going to put my bell back on.
Would you like me to just improvise while you do that?
A trombone joke?
I don't know any trombone. I know some conductor jokes.
Oh, well, who doesn't? Sure, have at it.
Do you know what snakes and conductors have in common?
Toe.
They're both slimy and have no ears.
Go
ahead.
That's good. I thought it was they had.
I love you too. You're good.
I thought when you found them on the road, they were skid marks in front of the snake. Okay, so I'm just going to play a little. Like I mentioned, now the trombone is used more for vocal music, and it's used in the orchestra quite a bit. One thing I wanted to say too, Andrew showed all the trumpets that are out there. We generally have. This is your typical trombone, the tenor trombone, it's called, and this is what beginners learn on. It's what jazz players play on for the most part. There's also bass trombone, which is a larger board instrument, and plays a little bigger, a little bit wider. And then there's an alto trombone, which is pitched a fourth up, and that's in the key of E flat, and would be doubling the altos in the choir. So when you're doubling the choir, you have the altos with the alto, the tenors with the tenor, and the basses with the bass. And I wanted to quickly show you also the glissando, the one thing that we can do, although Bill did it pretty nicely with the hand over there, which is slide between the notes. Always the clown, right? So, like I mentioned, we're kind of known for playing very vocal, beautiful music, and also we're often the clowns. So I'm going to play a little bit of Send in the Clowns.
Beautiful.
And it is true, we're all clowns. I'm sad to say, but that's the trombone.
From high priest to clown. It's
Yes, high priest to clown.
Yeah. Well, this is
Short
great.
trip.
It's a very short trip, exactly. So, in addition to the colors that we've already been displaying, I know that you've got some mutes in there, and so there are other clear colors that we can get from the instruments. And maybe, do you have a mute with you, or can stop? Yeah, and maybe also stock. So here's a couple of the other sound, the kind of variations of the palettes that you can get by putting various types of mutes. I don't know what you want to do. Bill, do you want to go first?
Sure. So, in addition to playing the open horn, a lot of composers found that if we somehow put something in the bell, is usually made of wood or some sort of fiber wood, and also metal, it would drastically change the color. I showed you earlier how in Mozart's day they had to get the missing notes with their hand, and that also then once we got the notes that we were missing, the composer said, well, there were some cool colors by having that hand. So Mahler would write lots of stuff for what's called stopped horn or stuffed horn. Here's what we do to get that color. Very different. If we use this, it's basically the same thing. This is a stopping mute. Just a little more direct.
Mm-hmm.
This is a fiber mute.
Yeah, fascinating. And for trumpets, you have two main different kinds of mutes, right?
Yeah,
The
there's
principal ones.
there's two main ones, and then I have a couple others. I'll show you really quick. The main one that we use for the majority of the time is a straight mute, and it does a couple of things. I'll play a couple of notes, but like Bill was saying, it's a little bit more like a stopped sound maybe than like a fiber mute. We do have mutes that are made out of fiber too that we use often for soft playing, but these metal ones are the ones we use the most. It's a little bit more direct, a little bit brighter, and just changes the color of the sound quite a bit. It's quite a bit bit of a different sound. Oh,
I noticed that he's old. Every time he bends
I
down
know.
to pick up a horn or maybe
every time. Every time. I'm old and I have 2 children, which adds it's like a plus 10, which makes me 62. I should be able to retire now. But you should be retiring too. And this is hey, this is my time to talk.
He's got the talking stick.
I am. This is my. You are taking up my time. So this is a cup mute, which is a much more mellow sound.
Yeah.
So you can really hear the difference. Just a couple. One other. I'll show you really quick. This is the Harmon mute. Oh, also, my colleague Steve said I had to show you this mute. It's a piccolo mute. I'm not going to play it, but it's 3D printed, and that's the claim to fame. He's so excited. I can't even tell you how excited he is about this mute. He is trying to use it all the time, whether it should be used or not. Steve's like, I think I can use that there. I'm like, you're playing a flugelhorn. This won't fit. No, I think I can make it work. Anyway, this is the Harmon mute, which this is the Miles Davis mute.
Yeah.
Which has 2 different sounds. So this one. You're not the only one who can do that trick. But
you didn't grunt.
I didn't bend down. It's the bending that makes me grunt. Wow, that could go so wrong. Don't do it. And this is without the stem. And this is really more what Miles used the majority of the time, was a Harmon mute without stem to get that really grainy kind of sound.
Now, in pictures, you'll pretty much hear all of those extra combinations of instruments because, as I mentioned, that's some of the things that are called for. There's also, anybody want a flutter tongue? Yeah. You make it sound easy, but that's not just the same as going, I don't think. I mean, you're doing something else.
And I have to say, one of my favorite child moments in my whole life was my daughter trying to figure out how to flutter tongue because she didn't know what it was. So I'd say, no, it's, and she would say, e. And I was like, no, e. Am I doing it, Dad? No, e, no, e. Like over and over and over. And she still can't do it. But she's a good gymnast, so she'll be fine.
She'll make up. Oh, tremolo, right. Yeah. This is kind of cool.
So we don't have violins in this piece, so they do this real fast bowing thing. We have to go.
But so what are you doing compared to, I mean, because if you put the valve down normally, that would change the pitch, right? It would be like a trill.
Thing on the horn is that makes it pretty much different from a lot of our overtone series. The number of notes that we have available is actually the same as the trombone, but they don't generally have to play as high as we do. They play a little bit lower, so they're using the lower partials available. The trumpet's pitched an octave. Their overtones are an octave lower than ours, so their notes are farther spaced apart. On the horn, basically, I can play all sorts of notes with the same fingering. So what I'm doing to get that tremolo is I'm taking 2 notes that have the same fingering and just wiggling them back and forth.
Can I just point out I can do that too, but I make it look much easier.
Smooth, gorgeous, smooth. Yeah. Maybe we could talk a little bit about the main piece on this program that we're going to be doing Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. The first half, we're going to keep a little bit of a secret for right now, but where the brass and percussion really get to strut their stuff is in this arrangement of Mussorgsky's piano piece, Pictures at an Exhibition. Familiar probably to most people, perhaps as a piano piece, but certainly if you go to orchestra concerts, in the brilliant and colorful and slightly perfumed version that Ravel did, which shows off the whole orchestra in a very virtuosic way. This version that we're doing was written by an Englishman called Elgar Howarth. He was a player, I believe, for many years in the Philip Jones Brass Ensemble. There's a great tradition of brass playing in my native country, predominantly really through the brass bands in the collieries, in the mines, a great long-standing tradition. I don't know whether it still exists. Maybe not so.
No, yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it still does. So
Huge, yeah.
yeah, I just haven't lived there for a long time. So yeah, so it's where some of the great British brass players cut their teeth. So Elgar Howarth knew what his colleagues in the Philip Jones Brass Ensemble could do, which is pretty much anything. And so this is a real virtuosic outing. It is not to be attempted at home and only to be done with top-notch brass players that we've managed to assemble this week. So I just thought we could talk a little bit about what are some of the challenges for each individual instrument that you find in this piece that you might not necessarily find in it, even in a Mahler symphony.
Well, one thing that I've encountered this week is finding out that string players never have to breathe, and we're playing a lot of notes that were originally scored for them, and there are moments where the combination of elevation and playing this piece makes me wonder where I am, and so hopefully by the end of the week we'll all be used to breathing. The last move, the second to last move, Baba Yaga.
Baba Yaga,
Yeah. Okay.
Like that.
Yeah. Just got the pronunciation today. Yeah, features endless notes, and even more so than any of the other movements. Everybody is just moving all the time. So I think there's all kinds of stories that you'll be able to hear in each movement of this piece.
Unfortunately, there are two tubas in this piece and a euphonium. So that those are grouped as one kind of family. 4 horns plus a fifth for relief, 3 trombones, and 6 trumpets of various hues. So it's a big band. Yes, trumpets win, but one of the reasons I'm mentioning is that you can at least mitigate, cellos and basses can just do this ad nauseum. You can't do that on one tuba, but if you alternate between the first and second tuba, but it has challenges of its own, because then you have to match your sound and intonation to one another. That's hard. From the horn point of view, Bill, how about for you?
Yeah, for us, it's different than the Ravel orchestration because we're playing fiddle parts, we're playing clarinet parts, we're playing basically saxophone parts. It's a challenge in that, in a fun way, because we're getting to play some of the melodies that we just listened to when we're doing the Ravel orchestration. But from a technical standpoint, it's just a lot faster. The range is a lot greater. And we're lucky we've got 5 of us there, and so as Alasdair was saying, we can spell each other. If we need to breathe, which we do, we will make choices so that we're not breathing at exactly the same time. So you don't hopefully hear a big hole in the line where they're like going, and if someone does faint, there's 4 other people to take their place. But it's a fun challenge, and as Alasdair said, this is only to be tempted by professionals. Don't try this at home. We don't want to be calling the Wood River Medical Center for any other reasons than something important.
Now, from the trombone's point of view, in the Ravel, you start the first couple of pieces, and then you have this long tacit for about 15 minutes before you come in again.
Yes, well, not quite. We do play some. So I had a good chuckle today during the rehearsal because while everybody else was working their butts off, we're chilling out, thinking about what we're going to order at the Sawtooth Club later. So I wonder now, how long ago was this arrangement done?
Well, I remember doing it as an undergraduate at Cambridge in 1980, probably 1982, and it wasn't, I mean, it had been gone a few years, but I'm guessing the 70s.
I'm wondering if he had a trombone section he didn't trust. Because we don't do, I mean, the difficulty of our role in this is understanding what our job is at different times. So we are supporting. So we're understanding when we're taking things over and when we're supporting and how we're supporting. There is one big movement called Catacombs where we get to fill the room. We'll say we get to do what trombone players do best and play very loud. But for the most part, there's a few spots here and there where he's trusted us with some fast stuff. But for the most part, he's left it to the valves. And I don't know if that was because he didn't trust the trombones he had at the time, or if he was just looking for a different color. And I don't know what the.
I'm guessing more
Yeah.
the latter because
Yeah.
that.
But most of the brass band writing nowadays, you have a lot more active stuff for the trombone, so it is interesting from our standpoint. But we're okay with it. It's okay. It's okay.
Speaking of active, though, I've left the most active to last.
So yeah, as Alasdair said, there are 6 trumpets and quite an array of trumpets. We have 3 of the trumpets are playing piccolo trumpet at different points. The piccolo parts, the 2 main parts, are really, really high, extremely difficult. There's an E-flat trumpet part that's very technical and played beautifully by Karen Donnelly. She's right over there, Karen Donnelly. And then there are 3 C trumpets that have just really difficult technical things to do. So many more notes than we play in the Ravel version. And I'm playing the flugelhorn, which isn't so much technical itself. The parts aren't that technical, but it's very lyrical, very soft, and fairly exposed at many moments. And I think what Bill said is so correct from my point of view. It's just so much fun to play totally different things, to sort of challenge yourself and put yourself out there in a way that's risky, where you're a little bit feeling right on the edge. But I think that that's the very best music in the world, is when you're right on the edge. That's when you make the best result and have the most exciting performance. So,
Well, we have been having a tremendous amount of fun playing this amazing piece, which we hope you will enjoy as the centerpiece of the program. The percussion's role in this is largely sort of adding local color where appropriate, but it's to be honest, it's the brass that carry the great weight on their shoulders of this brilliant and virtuosic piece. I see by the clock that it's probably a really good time for us to turn the proceedings over to you and to have you ask any questions that are on your mind about my fabulous colleagues here on stage. So if you've come prepared with anything, now's the time. Shout it out. Yes, sir. Right.
Well, we have more and more women in the industry now. In fact, there are 2 in our horn section. We have 1 in the trumpet section, right? And so we of course want as many diverse sections as possible. And I can tell you that last year I took 3 women in my class at Rice University. Maybe 30 years ago it wasn't quite as usual, but you'll see it more and more these days. So it's a good question, and I know you will see a lot more representation in the future.
Yes.
I'll come with the mic to make
That's
it
a
a
good
little easier.
idea.
This is for the tuba man. How much does
Peter,
a
tuba
tuba weigh? And for all of you, how do you transport those on airplanes? Do you have to have extra insurance, et cetera?
Well, this instrument, like all the other instruments, I have many different instruments. This is a fairly large orchestral instrument. It weighs about 35 pounds, and it's awkward and delicate. So it's a challenge to carry around. And I've been really careful walking on the icy, snowy street here. And I happened to be on the flight with Alasdair.
Right, from San Francisco.
So he witnessed me being pre-boarded with my tuba and waltzing into the 2 seats that one for myself and one for the tuba. And, I was really disappointed that they didn't give me an extra snack. But
Party.
I wondered if any of you have, or how many of you have played this version of
the piece before?
Well,
We actually, yes.
yeah, we played it in 2009, right?
Something like that, or 10, yeah.
Yeah.
At the pavilion.
Yeah, that's the only time I've performed it was with you.
Right.
I recorded it
You,
with Karen a couple summers ago. Yeah, we have a brass group up in Canada. Sorry.
We have a brass group up in Canada that we tour with occasionally and have made some recordings. So we recorded this, which was fun.
have you guys done it? Oh, yeah. I did, as I mentioned earlier, when I was believing, I said this should only be attempted by professionals, but when I was at undergraduate at Cambridge, there was some very, very fine brass players that I grew up with, the National Youth Orchestra that were at the university, and I think one of them must have said, hey, there's this arrangement by Elgar Half, what if we put a brass concert together and did this as a second half? And so, yeah, that's where I first came across it, and I thought, this is just, I love the Ravel, but there's something about this version that really makes me excited. So, yeah.
I had heard when I was growing up in England that the brass was not played by women because it was thought to be that their lungs were smaller than the men.
Yeah. Demonstrably not so by the fantastic number of women brass players out there today. It's an old saw that is thankfully being laid aside.
Let's see, here.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi. A couple of you mentioned band and band teachers and whatnot made a big influence on you when you were young. And I know nationwide that's a real problem with, bands being cut and this and that. And I was just, we kind of live in a bubble here, but I was curious in your home orchestras if there's an increase or any interaction with maybe local schools and that kind of thing, and what's you see being happening on that front.
Well, I know it might be different up in Toronto, but a lot of programs are being cut for sure, and they're moving to before school and after school. And it's really, really tough for us to see. We do have programs in place that bring the students in to see concerts. We have a youth orchestra that is fully funded, so the students play for free and can attend it for free. But we are definitely seeing the impact of it for sure, no question.
Houston.
In Texas, football is king. And every football team needs a marching band for their halftime show. So, interestingly enough, the band programs in Texas are legendarily good. And once they get through marching season, they go into concert season, and then they have region contests and state contests. So, when I complain about the marching band stuff, it's actually, I don't complain as much because I know that that's funding that band program and keeps it viable and important for that school because they want to have those kids out there on the field.
How does the cornet fit into the trumpet?
That's a good question. So the cornet is also a conical instrument, and it is played often in orchestral music. A composer like Tchaikovsky or Berlioz often wrote for 2 trumpets and 2 cornets, and the cornet part, not always, but quite often being the more active part, the more soloistic part. So when I play in the orchestra in Toronto with Gord, most of the time I'm going to play the cornet part because it's the more soloistic part. It's also a different sound than a piston trumpet like this, a C trumpet. It's rounder. It's more like what we were talking about before. It's actually a more beautiful round sound, and I love cornet. I love to play it. I play it quite a lot on recitals and other things. But yeah, it does. Oh no, it has valves, but the bore is more like what Bill's and Peter's is, right? So it gives it a warmer sound.
So for Mr. Van Buren, the last stuffer that you had was conical and dark, and I was wondering if it was hollow as well. What was it made out of, and would you demonstrate that one again?
Made of basically a fiber, and there's wood on the bottom, and it is a little warmer sound.
And is it
Hollow. Yeah.
No, it's not solid. It's hollow in the middle, and believe it or not, it has a little adjustable tuning mechanism, and then there's corks on the outside to fit it in and keep it in the bell. But yeah, it has to be hollow in the middle so that the sound can escape, both around and then and resonate inside the butte.
One more question, and I think then it's dinner time. Speaking for myself.
Yes, if you were to, whoa, excuse me, unwind your instruments, unwind that tubing, how
Who wins?
long would it go? Thank you.
So because there's so many different tubes here, if I uncoil this thing, it's about 18 feet long. Yeah, it's pretty cool because I've taken garden hoses and I'll cut it to the length and then stick a mouthpiece on one end and a kitchen funnel on the other. You can get the same notes. It's a hell of a lot cheaper, I'll tell you that.
How about
The tuba's a similar length, believe it or not.
Average trumpet, it's around 8 feet, I think. Right? 4.5. I had an expert in the audience, 4.5 feet. Sorry, trumpet. I didn't graduate from university. Look at the Canadians. We have no idea what we're doing.
We only speak metric. That's the problem. I believe it's 2.6 meters.
There you go. Great. Well, listen, everybody, that's a fun note to end on. I want to just thank you all for coming, and especially to thank my great friends and colleagues for sharing all of their wonderful thoughts. And I think we've all learned something tonight. So give it up for them. Thank you. Thank you.